First, I want to say welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight on this very special edition of the Frances Crowe Film Series. My name is Heather Diaz, and I'm an Information Services Librarian at Forbes. And although we are gathering virtually tonight, excuse me, I want to recognize that the library stands on Nonotuck land, and we also acknowledge our neighboring Indigenous nations, the Nipmuc and the Wampanoag to the east, the Mohegan and the Pequot to the south, the Mohican to the west, and the Abenaki to the north. We pay our respects to Indigenous elders, past and present, of these communities, and any others who may be here today. This is and always will be Indigenous land. Also, we're grateful to the scholarship of historian Lisa Brooks, as well as Bixie Utzler and Ian Miller, upon whose research this land acknowledgement draws. For all of y'all who are here tonight, please feel free to use the chat to pose questions or comments as we go along. Also, if you're having technical problems, you can use the chat to send me a message, and I'll do my best to help you from afar. And I have just one final note before I hand things off to Carolyn, and that is to say that we are recording this Zoom meeting tonight, and it will be posted on the Forbes Library YouTube page afterwards, and I'll also share the link with Carolyn and Robbie to send out.
Thank you, Heather. You make this all possible since, well, you also helped when we were in person at Forbes as well. So welcome everybody. I think everybody here looking at the names knows me. I'm Carolyn Oppenheim, and since Frances has left us, I am the sole coordinator of the film series that we named, used to be the Resistance Film Series. Frances would not have wanted it in her name in her lifetime, but we didn't just want, it wasn't so much to honor her, and this is about the film as well. It was not so much to honor Frances that we decided to call it the Frances Crowe Film Series, but to draw on her inspiration that film was possibly the greatest tool for energizing people for social change and educating people about social change and keeping that idea primary. The reason we're showing this film now is first because Robbie approached me and told me it was available, and it was so perfect because it's March. Oh dear, it's March, and it's the month of Frances's birthday. It's 2 years since we had the March celebrating her 100th birthday, but more to the point, there's some other reasons. It's the 10th anniversary of the meltdown of Fukushima, and this plant that these wonderful activists won the battle to get it closed was exactly the same kind of nuclear power plant as Fukushima. As those of you who have seen the film know, we have some 20 still like it in operating in our country, and so it's still a live issue, and those are good enough reasons. And the other is that, oh my goodness, okay, sorry. Oh my goodness, I cannot stop this. Well, try to ignore that, it'll stop. I lost my train of thought. Hello, I'm on the air right now. I'll call you later. So, what was the other? I really lost my train of thought. You know, when you're doing stuff from home, you don't realize that this kind of thing will happen. Yes, I was saying that we're suddenly in an explosion of citizen activism since the Black Lives Matter in the midst of our terrible political situation. And I felt watching Robbie's film that even though it's about the specifics of that cause, somehow it gives me inspiration for what we as citizens have to be doing now and are doing now. And it feels in a way like a pep rally for what we have to do on the voter suppression and all the rest. And it conjures up the memory of Frances as a team leader in a way too around this issue, which no doubt she would be. So I think that's really enough of what I wanted to say about the selection of the film and some of my thoughts about the importance of it. And I want to first turn it over to Robbie for some remarks. Perhaps you could say why you wanted to revive this film at this time, because it was before Black Lives Matter. You might want to share with us. And then I'm going to turn it over to Paki, who was in the Shut It Down affinity group with Frances. Not only that, she had I don't know how many decade-long relationship with Frances, even shared her home. But Robbie, what were some of the reasons why you decided to edit this and bring this back again?
Well, to first start off, I've been making documentary films for my entire adult life. I got an early start when I was 18 as a college student at Hampshire College. And I've been chronicling people who stick their necks out to take risks for grassroots social change ever since. And Frances Crowe is one of the very first activists who I met when I first came to the Pioneer Valley back in 1976. And so I feel very honored and privileged to have known Frances, and I've been inspired by her. And I would say that most of my films that have been chronicling people involved in change are issues that I care deeply about, and I tend to film people who inspire me, with the hope that the activists who inspire me and who I'm able to film and make a portrait of within a film about a particular issue will inspire others.
But that's
so I feel.
I was asking a different question though, because this film you made some years ago, and there was a tremendous audience at the Academy watching it. I was asking you why you edited and brought it back. Robbie's about to take this nationwide and going to be in film festivals and whatnot all over the country. It's like a resurgence of this film, and we're lucky to be the first ones to see it. I was asking, what caused you to pick this of your films to do this with now?
Well, as an independent documentary filmmaker, it's always a struggle, one, to make these films. It was 5 years of filming and many more years of editing, and then it's been distributed on a grassroots basis for several years now in different forms. So there was those initial showings that we had at the Academy of Music and at the Lattice Theater, really as a sneak preview before the film was totally finished back in the fall of 2016.
Right.
Then the film had its official world premiere at the Provincetown Film Festival in 2017 and at the Vermont International Film Festival. And then later in 2019, I was lucky to have the film broadcast nationally on Link TV and Free Speech TV, as well as Vermont PBS. And so in finalizing the film for those broadcasts, I actually made a shorter version of the film. It was originally 104 minutes. Now it's 86 minutes because it just flowed better. And then there was an initial distribution after that. And now, because of COVID, what's interesting is that this whole notion of virtual cinema screenings has actually made it more possible for independent filmmakers like myself to reach a wider audience and to partner with local community groups who are concerned about particular issues to reach a wider audience as well. So when the 10th anniversary of Fukushima was coming up, as well as the 35th anniversary of Chernobyl, I realized that this was an opportunity to do yet another round of distribution for this film, to reach a wider audience, and maybe an audience that's more attuned now to activism, and not just anti-nuclear activists, not even just environmental activists, but to inspire people on all issues, because this film at the base and the core of it is about how people can make a difference from the grassroots by putting their bodies on the line, no matter what the issue. So that's why I made this film.
Thank you. By the way, I don't know if it's my computer or yours, but you are looking not super clear. Heather, do you see that?
It may just be a connection issue, but
okay.
I think we'll just forge ahead.
Okay, Paki, we'd love to hear you share a bit about Shut It Down and your sojourn with Frances. Is Paki here? Where's Paki?
Paki needs to be unmuted.
Thank you. Thank you. I think there are other people here who are in the audience who have also been part of both our affinity group and other parts of the confluence, I like to think of it, that really brought about the closing down of the Vermont Yankee nuclear power plant.
Well, they're just after you speak.
There are just a couple of things I want to highlight. One is our persistence. And, you know, one of the things that happened was after Fukushima, there was this highlighting these Westinghouse nuclear reactors and how they were all bad. They all had the same flaws. Mm-hmm. But the one that they shut down first was Vermont Yankee. Now, Indian Point, which is closer to New York City, would have been a logical one to shut down, because look at all the people who would have, whose lives would end. But I think the reason they shut down Vermont Yankee first was because we were there, and not only was our Shut It Down affinity group that was persistent every month, as you saw in the film, we went to Frances's every month and made another plan and did some very creative things. But there was also the other tentacles, the other pieces of this, that we had Arnie Gunderson, we had state legislators, and we had hundreds of people, probably thousands in Vermont, who stood with us, or with whom we stood, because they were even more at risk than we were. I mean, one of the things that a lot of people didn't know was there were iodine tablets that were given to kids in Brattleboro. Wow. Because of that plant, because of that reactor. And I think it was Annika who said, don't call it a plant, because plants grow foods for us, but reactors don't. So I'll keep remembering to call it a reactor. So it was absolutely wonderful that we had this multi-pronged approach, that we were there, we were persistent, and periodically we had huge protests there, and people came together, so that when the Westinghouse people said, what are we going to shut down first? We were the biggest pain in the neck. We were the ones who every month got arrested. We were the ones who kept the focus on Vermont Yankee. And since then, of course, Plymouth has shut down, and others. Indian Point is still functioning. But so I think this is a really important thing. The two pieces are to be persistent, to keep going, and potlucks really help too. And the other is to reach out, to look at how not just our being there every month to show up, to name them, to call them out, but also to look at who are the legislators, what are the other vehicles, who are the people of conscience who are in positions of power to ally with. And and it worked. And really, Robbie, I think the way you document it, it's really beautiful. It's a great lesson for anybody who wants to do something, to make change, to make social change, to look at how these different people in different positions, in different locations, come together to make this change. And now we have it shut down. So I'll stop, but invite others who have other ideas. Or
Can you look at it? Does somebody want to come forward from the audience who was involved in this? Clea, were you? Well, look at the names, Paki. You said there are people that were involved. Does anybody want to come forward and talk about it?
And while we're waiting, I could add a particular point to what Paki was saying about why Vermont made a difference.
go ahead.
Well, first of all, I wanted to say that in the film, as a film, you know, there was 700 hours of footage and 5 years of filming. So I had to condense the story down to a viewable length and to focus on certain people who were the most eloquent and who could capture the story. But I do want to say that this was a mass movement. There was thousands of people involved and working for decades. In fact, the opposition to Vermont Yankee started even before the plant went into operation in 1972. And there were major protests in the late 70s, early 80s at Vermont Yankee. And for decades, people resisted the plant and worked to shut it down. So I came in starting filming in 2010 at a crucial time when the Vermont legislature was empowered to make a vote about the future operation of the plant. But it was really, it was definitely a mass movement of people that contributed to shutting down Vermont Yankee. And one of the reasons why the activists were so successful was because of Vermont being in this unique position of being the only state in the country that required a state license in addition to a federal license for operating a nuclear power plant. And why that was significant is that activists for years have been trying to battle the federal government, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and getting nowhere because the federal government and the Nuclear Regulatory Commission is totally in bed with the nuclear industry. So it was activists, and I would even, point out that the Citizens Awareness Network, Deb Katz, came up with a strategy of working on a state level because there they felt like they could have an impact. And I would have to say that myself filming in Vermont, I did a lot of filming in the Vermont legislature. It's probably one of the few places in the country where grassroots democracy actually works and citizens do have a voice through their elected officials. And so the activists decided strategically to work on a state level because there they could have an impact, and they certainly did.
That's helpful. And, just at this moment, somebody came in late, whom I know, Elomai, and I know her because she's with us in the Grannies. She lives in Vermont. And when we were speaking, she said, "Hello, are you there? Hello? El." She said that she would share a little. El, can you unmute yourself and give us your picture?
Why?
Hello, my Normetz. And
let me say this while we're waiting for. One of the things that happened was we got to know the police very well. And everything people think about Vermont and its friendliness and its down-homeness was exemplified. Well, we could look at the coloration of everybody there as something else to talk about, but everyone did his and her part. And I want to underscore that, Robbie, when you say it was a mass movement. We had so many people in so many different configurations, different groups coming from all over the Tri-County area, because for those of you who don't know or where it is it's located at closer to Boston than it was than it was to Montpelier or Burlington. And it was probably nicely put there so that the people of Vermont were not as affected as the people in Massachusetts or even New Hampshire. So, but we grew the movement all over, from Vermont to Massachusetts to New Hampshire, and in every walk of life, people got involved. And there is Elle, who's going to talk about what you all did in Vermont. So welcome, and tell us.
Thank you. Yes, we did a few marches, and it was just so wonderful to see it in the movie, in the film, through Brattleboro. And I remember being interviewed on the banks of the river on the New Hampshire side, across from Yankee Nuclear. What a contingent we had of people. I still remember us all going to the high school, and there were such powerful people involved. Betsy Williams from Safe and Green, Chad Simmons, Nancy Browse, who owns Everyone's Books in Brattleboro. And oh my goodness, they were just so wonderful, how they were so well informed and how they answered the Entergy people. You know, it was just so inspiring. And I was just very new up here in Vermont, so I was still working and driving back and forth between here and New York, so I couldn't attend all the events, but I was happy to attend the ones that I was able to attend. But I did meet a lot of great people, and we were all, a lot of them we were from the Bush War years, the peace movement. And anyway, I just can't say enough about how inspiring it was. And thank you so much, Robbie, for making this tremendous film.
Are there folks in the audience who want to have questions or make comments and participate? Nobody yet. Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead. I had a question to ask. Has anybody done any kind of study on the cancer rates, like in Vernon, let's say? Because I know that I had met people who had seen frogs that were, you know, mutating with like really weird, like 3 legs, and fish with tumors in them and stuff. And I'm just really curious about that. I don't know if there's been any follow-up on that kind of stuff.
I don't have numbers, Elle, but when we attended meetings at the school, both the Brattleboro and in Vernon, people would talk about the family members who had died of cancer. So it seemed like it was extraordinarily high, but there may be somebody here who knows better than I, but there certainly was, there's the anecdotal increase of cancer. Yeah.
I heard of a study that was done in the area of the Plymouth plant, which was also another one exactly like this plant. And there was a public health doctor from Harvard named Sidney, oh God, can't think of Sidney's last name. And it was suppressed. And he showed incredibly high rates of breast cancer in people who lived within certain distance of the Plymouth plant. And there was an enormous amount of work done to suppress and to try to destroy his reputation, you know, as a public health doctor. Yep. And that makes me think of how important it was to have this Arnie Gundersen, and how desperately important movement need to have whistleblowers. Yep. Because if Gundersen hadn't been willing to see the writing on the wall and change sides, and for which he paid a price. I mean, he didn't just lose his job, he lost his house, he lost his career. I mean, he came back, but oh my God, they paid a price.
Cather wrote to everyone. Frances used to talk about how connected she felt to the local police chief. Her name was Mary Beth. And one time we were at the reactor and Frances wasn't there. And Mary Beth said, "Where's Frances? Where's Frances?" She was so concerned that Frances wasn't there. And it was just a very sweet connection. And I mean, it was quite a loss to everybody basically Vermont Yankee, Vernon, Vermont collapsed with that end of the nuclear reactor. And so she was moved to somewhere else. But there was such a deep fondness, and I think she liked us all, but she really loved Frances.
Well,
So nice to hear.
One other point about the cancer rates I could add is that I think the study that you were referring to was actually the state of Massachusetts Public Health Department during the Dukakis administration conducted a study that showed that there was 2.5 times higher leukemia rates within a 5-mile radius of the Pilgrim nuclear power plant in Plymouth.
that's the one.
And there's also studies done in Germany that also showed higher leukemia rates and cancer rates around nuclear power plants. The problem is that these studies are not done by the nuclear industry. And for the most part, the governments, because they're in bed with the nuclear industry, don't fund them either, because they don't want to know the results. So this is what we're up against. And that people should understand that the nuclear power presents 3 different threats. There's the threat from low-level radiation that accumulatively, especially if you're in the area, will lead to cancers down the road, not immediate, but within 5 to 20 years, higher cancer rates. Then there's the threat of a massive large-scale accident like what happened at Fukushima and Chernobyl, where a large amount of radiation is released all at one time. And then there's the issue of nuclear waste, that even though Vermont Yankee is shut down, the high-level nuclear waste, including plutonium, is sitting in canisters on the banks of the Connecticut River, and they will be there indefinitely because there is no place to put them. And these canisters are going to leak in the future, decades down the road. And so this problem is not gone away, and it's going to be confronting us in the years to come.
Does that mean that strontium and tritium is still leaking into the ground, into the ground and into the river?
Well, there's not current leaking of material because the plant is shut down. What was leaked in the past is still in the groundwater underneath the plant. So one of the incidences that you see in the film is that there was a massive leak of tritium into the groundwater underneath Vermont Yankee in 2010. Some of that was cleaned up, but there's no way they can clean up all of it. So it's still there underneath the soil, in the groundwater, and it did reach the Connecticut River. So this issue of cleaning up Vermont Yankee is also raises questions about how well they're really going to do it, because it's all about the devil's in the detail. So for instance, the Federal Nuclear Regulatory Commission's guidelines only say you only have to go down, for instance, so many feet and not any further. Well, that's really not doing a thorough job. So there's still going to be contamination at that site. There's no way that they can clean it up totally. And the thing to know about the nuclear waste, the high-level nuclear waste is dangerous for 250,000 years. I mean, that number is just astronomical. We have no way as a society to really know how to deal with this, and yet they keep on making more of it. That's what we as activists need to put this issue of nuclear power and nuclear waste on the radar screens, because unfortunately, it's not on the radar screens of most environmental activists or even climate justice activists. And so we need to continue this dialogue to bring the consciousness of the dangers of nuclear power back into the public square.
And the nuclear power industry is trying to get in and claim that it's clean and that it's an alternative to fossil fuel, and that it may not be for the long term, but you know, until wind and solar can get up to meet our energy needs, you know, there they are, cleaner than biomass. They don't dirty up the air. And so they, you know, they're still around and they're going to be around. So, you know, it is part, it does need to be in the consciousness of climate activists without question. But like,
and it's important to know that the Biden administration.
What?
I was just going to say that the Biden administration is supporting the development of what they call small modular reactors. And first of all, they produce nuclear waste, so they're not safe and clean. And also they're a myth because it's just theory right now. And solar and wind is much cheaper and it's available now. You don't need years and years to develop it. So we really need to change our policies to go down, you know, for a Green New Deal and for a renewable energy future.
That I was going to ask about the canister and the canisters, wherever they've closed plants. Who has an ongoing responsibility to have oversight to make sure they don't rust? And as you said, at some point they may leak. Who has the ongoing responsibility of oversight for those?
I think they still come under the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which is the federal government. And they've kind of preempted states from having any say-so when it comes to safety matters and radiological matters.
Only state.
Well, but it wasn't about radiation or safety. It was non-safety matters. And that's how they play this game. So it's rigged. Yeah. And what's important to know about these canisters is that there's a difference in quality of these, what they call dry casts, which are metal and steel. In Europe, they go for the more expensive canisters that are thicker walled steel and ability to monitor from the inside. Whereas the American corporations, including Entergy, and the canisters that they have chosen to have on the banks of the Connecticut River are very thin walled steel and no ability to monitor. So again, this is a catastrophe that is only being kicked down the can literally into the future because these canisters are only rated to last a certain number of decades, and studies are showing that they're already bound to be leaking sooner than their anticipated life. And so this is still going to be with us to deal with as a society for years to come.
I think another piece of that, Robbie, that you really highlight in the film is Hattie Nessel taking on the NRC, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, reminding us that they are not the watchdogs, they were the lapdogs of the nuclear industry.
Yes.
And she really calls them out. It was one of the highlights of them being there and also of seeing it in the film.
Yeah, it's true. Trump didn't begin the regulatory agencies being in favor of the industries. It was happening before. He just made it more egregious. But you know, we've got the problem over in the Berkshires. General Electric was supposed to stick around. It was one of the Superfund sites they were supposed to clean up. And they had polluted the Housatonic and other waterways, and they'd done a lot of environmental damage. And they just picked up and moved to Boston and sort of cut their ties so that they're not around to hound, you know, and keep them on the cleanup case. So we've had a lot of bad environmental disasters in this country where there's supposed to have been cleanups, and the industry has gotten out of it. this happens to be the one near us, but it's a pattern.
I want to just highlight one other thing, and that was, Lo, you were talking about us being out in our kayaks on the river across from Vermont Yankee. There were so many ways that we, the citizens, the grassroots, got creative. I mean, there was the winter walk from Brattleboro all the way to Montpelier, and in the freezing cold weather, going out on the river and floating and having a presence there. People bringing that wonderful cow to protest because of what that nuclear plant was doing to people's milk, you know, right across the street from the nuclear reactor was a family farm, organic milk farm. And you think, oh my God, of course it's organic, but what's coming in the air? What's in all of this? So so I think there were a number of things. There was a lot of creativity, and there were a lot of people with very good information. You know, we had nuclear scientists, we had lawyers, we had a lot of people. And so I think, you know, when we talk about this film, it's a really great example of grassroots action, also getting in touch with all the people who had the facts, ma'am, who could really put it out to the naysayers, to the people who were the cynics, who were the more cautious people, to say, listen, the mainstream, the main line is that this is, what did you say, Robbie? This is clean energy, it's effective, it's efficient, and it's an alternative to those fossil fuels. But I mean, even years ago when Hattie brought folks from Australia to tell us about how dirty nuclear power was from the time that they were digging the uranium mines, that you know, across the board, this was a great action, and I think we need to keep in mind that we may need these again, and to be inspired by it, and to look at how, whatever the issues are, wherever you are, that this is a great model of this bringing together the grassroots with the experts in their fields to really make arguments for life on this planet.
And the third pillar of that stool is a guy like Gunderson, or like in the Vietnam War when we had Daniel Ellsberg, because without somebody on the inside who can give you the definitive stuff and reveal what they're really doing, you're not as strong. And those people pay really terrible prices. I mean, you know, we've got journalists in prison, people trying to get information out. Robbie, have you had any contact with Gunderson, and do you know where he is and what he's doing now? Robbie? Did you hear me?
Yes, well, yes, I hear you now. There was a little bit of glitchiness there.
Sorry.
Arnie and Maggie Gunderson run an organization called Fair Winds Energy Education. And so they're continuing to use their skills and knowledge to put out information about nuclear power. What makes them so unique is that because they were former insiders in the nuclear industry, they really understand how this how the nuclear industry works, but also they have the technical knowledge to understand and to explain to the public what these dangers really are. So they continue to put out on an ongoing basis information. And one of the things that they've been focusing on over the last few years is the contamination from Fukushima of radioactive particles that traveled hundreds of miles across Japan. And they did samples, for instance, in the Olympics stadiums where the Olympics may be held this summer, showing that there was radioactive particles, high level radioactive, I mean, microscopic, but highly radioactive particles. And with nuclear radiation, the danger is, even if it's a tiny microscopic particle, if you inhale that, and it gets, or you eat something that has the radioactive particle in it and gets inside your body, it's the internal radiation that is the most dangerous to you, because that little microscopic piece of radiation, even though it could be said that it's low level, it's actually high level to the cells that it gets lodged in your lung or in your tissues. It's the cells that are around it that are exposed to a high level of radiation, and over time, that is what can develop into a cancer. So Arnie has been really in the forefront of collecting samples from, let's say, vacuum cleaner bags and car air filters to show how this radiation from Fukushima has traveled all around Japan and continues to be a danger.
Oh, I wish I'd invited him for tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe we'll have another film on this subject and have him.
Another point I'd like to make, and this is where the environmental movement can make coalitions with communities of people of color, is that the communities of color, and particularly indigenous communities and Latino communities, are now actually on the front lines of where the nuclear waste is being sited. There are proposals to site nuclear waste dumps in New Mexico and Texas in predominantly Latino and indigenous communities. There's already a high-level nuclear waste dump that is on hold, but it was slated for Shoshone land in Nevada at Yucca Mountain. And the uranium that is mined for nuclear power plants comes from predominantly indigenous lands in the United States, in Navajo, particularly in the Southwest, as well as in the Dakotas. And this uranium mining has led to some of the highest levels of cancer among indigenous communities in the Southwest, in the Dakotas. There's something like 13,000 open pit uranium mines that have been abandoned that are spewing radioactive dust all throughout the middle of the country, the Dakotas in particular. And this is a problem that nobody except for the affected indigenous communities really knows about and is looking at. So again, we need to form coalitions to put this issue on the map.
Wow.
Want to do that?
You know, New Mexico has been a site for nuclear testing and military nuclear weapon construction, hidden manufacturing for a long time, since the 50s. The state must be ticking.
There is a group,
New Mexico is actually one of the most nuclearized states in the country.
Yeah.
there is a group, shut down the mine, shut down the uranium mines, that still has a website. It's made up of indigenous people and others, including Margaret Flowers and other members of the Green Party who worked together. And in fact, I was part of it, doing some work with them, and we tried to get Grijalva to sponsor a bill, but this was not a popular bill. And when they went out to the Dakotas, they found there were high levels of radiation in schoolyards. It's really terrible. It's quite tragic, and this is certainly something that that needs our attention.
There's a question in the chat. Denise, if you unmute yourself, you could ask it. It might be easier than my reading it. Would you be willing? Denise McCann? Can you unmute yourself?
Yeah, hi. I was just hoping, you guys have done an amazing amount of work thinking about fusion-based reactions, so separating nuclei. And there's been a lot of work now on fission, bringing them back together, and the hope is that they can do this without producing radioactive waste. Yeah. Yeah, my 9-year-old just said, yeah. And it doesn't look like they've been able to do that really very effectively in practice, and they're starting to scale up reactors out in Europe. So I was just wondering, as we transition to calling a new type of nuclear power plant plane, what you guys think about that, whether our work is done.
From my understanding, and this comes directly from Arnie Gunderson, is that all of these new nuclear proposals are one theory. They don't really exist. They're going to take decades of development and lots of money, whereas renewables, solar and wind, are cheaper and they're available now. And they produce nuclear waste. Maybe they produce theoretically less nuclear waste, but nuclear waste is the most highly toxic poison known to the planet. And if they produce any of it, they're not a sustainable or a desirable form of energy.
That's a good answer. I guess the dilemma is getting solar and wind. I mean, this society wants to have energy capacity on steroids. And all we talk about is alternative ways to meet the needs of glutted energy without thinking that we may have to change our lifestyle and power down. And that's not a popular discussion.
Well, maybe that's the question that Frances would pose, does our life
Frances
is war?
did pose it.
Yes.
Simply, yes.
And so it's not just as war, does our lifestyle depend on war, but does it depend on the depletion of all these, of life on Earth, basically? So I think it is a good question. And for the Frances Crowe Film Series, it's a very good question.
A central question, but it is a very marginal community that would even contemplate that. And that is the problem, that the corporations have produced toys. I mean, every new gadget, electronic, requires more energy and more power in the phones and the cars. And, this society is drunk on an energy life. And I can't imagine how you would get the larger society to really consider moving down to a simpler life. I mean,
Well,
we hail people like Francis and Gandhi and people who choose to live simply so others may simply live, but others don't choose to simply live. They choose to live very differently, and they can't imagine living any other way.
well,
So
I think
Robbie, we need a film series of people who know how to live simply, and communities who know how to live simply.
So we challenge, do we want to have this standard of living or quality of life? And what's the difference? Robbie, that next film.
Silence. We need the Simplicity Film Series.
Yeah, I feel like we do have to have this conversation as a society, because the way we're going is not sustainable as a planet. Okay. And it is about reducing consumption. That is key. That really is key.
You know how long I don't know when the experts first began knowing this, But when I was an undergraduate at the University of Michigan, Ann Arbor, in the fall of 1960, that sounds like the Middle Ages to most people, there were a bunch of experts from a group called the Club of Rome. It was an intellectual think tank. And they said that this unending growth was going to destroy the world. That's how long ago they said that. And just imagine how we lived then would be considered simple by today's standards. And they probably knew before that. That was just when I first tuned in at age 18. Oh, somebody is here from Thailand. Kevin Webb, I am in Thailand and my concern is the number of Indian nuclear reactors. Kevin, are you in Thailand right now? Would you like to speak?
Yes, I'm in Thailand. I've been here since 2007 with 4 years in China. I'm a Brit and I watched all the film yesterday, but I've actually been following this for a long time. I've got a part-time degree in chemistry, so I really understand the science as well.
How did you find out about this film and discussion?
Because I go on to Eventbrite, type in media and films, and I watch a lot of films that way. And although I'm in Thailand, with my VPN, I can put myself in America and watch the films as well.
Welcome, thank you.
But
So
the films are really good. Yeah, but I'm concerned because I don't think a country like India, because I've actually been there, doesn't have the even the clout that your people have in America. They're very lax. So I'm really, really concerned. I have less concern about China because you get a lot of disinformation about China, but they are very, very strict. I know from working there that the way that people are monitored and how they come and check on schools and make sure you've got your qualifications. But India really concerns me because they've got one of the biggest number of nuclear reactors in Asia.
Wow. Well, I know what you mean about them being lax. My late husband, for some 35 years of his life, was trying to get justice for the people in Bhopal, India, where a pesticide plant, it was negligence and lack of safety, and a pesticide plant leaked pesticide and 16,000 people died in one night, and many, many, many more people not only continued to die, but are continuing to die because the pesticide got into the aquifers of the water and it's still affecting people. But
I'm glad that Thailand doesn't have any. Like, we tried to ban some of the harmful pesticides that aren't used in the West, and we were leaned on by the American government not to ban them. Otherwise they're going to take away some of the funding that we get.
Oh my God.
Yeah, so people are using, pesticides here with just a face mask that were banned 20 years ago in the West.
We have a lot to look at in what our government is allowing and encouraging. Thank you for bringing that up.
Can I just say, it's a slightly side issue, but because of the subsidies that you pay your farmers, Asian and African farmers can't compete in the world market. So they're having to cut corners all the time. And if you stop subsidizing your farmers, it would be a fairer world market. But at the moment, we can't compete with the Europeans and the Americans because, it's like socialism gone crazy. You actually, most of the American farms would not be viable if it wasn't for the subsidies.
And that's true in Latin America too. But,
yeah,
it's interesting. We're not subsidizing it's not family farms. They're subsidizing agribusiness.
Something I've followed, you've lost 40% of your topsoil in the last 100 years in America.
Oh my.
well, one thing I could add about the Indian nuclear situation is that there are some very big projects under construction right now in India, and the ones that have already been created have displaced thousands and thousands of poor Indian farmers. And during my filming of the activism in Vermont, there was several there was one time when the activists sponsored a tour of Indian anti-nuclear activists, and I conducted an interview with one of them for my film, and there was so much footage I couldn't include it. But what's interesting in India is here, when people protest nuclear power, they kind of get slapped on the wrist. Whereas in India, people are shot and killed and jailed. So people need to be in solidarity with the activists around the world who are opposing nuclear power plants and nuclear waste dumps. And in my launching of this new virtual tour for Power Struggle through Facebook, and by simply going through the groups on Facebook under nuclear, I've been now in contact with activists in India, in South Africa, in Australia, in Canada, Wales, France, Turkey, a whole number of countries. And we all need to be in solidarity with each other, because the nuclear industry is global and the resistance to nuclear has to be global as well.
Robbie, thank you.
Can I ask one quick question of you, Robbie? Have you actually suffered a lot of harassment yourself on social media and other things? Because this seems to be the way these corporations work. They get third parties to harass the radical people online. It happens a lot in Thailand, I know. Have you personally been harassed a lot?
Well, no, I actually have not. So I'm lucky that way. But I do have a very interesting story. During the filming of Power Struggle, early on, actually, after that leak first happened, where there was a massive leak of radioactive tritium under the Vermont Yankee plant, the Vermont Public Service Board, a few months later, in April of 2010, was conducting a kind of inspection tour to see how the cleanup was going. And the public service company opened up this tour to the press. So as a member of the press, I signed on to be on this tour. So I had to go through Vermont Yankee and the spokesperson that you see in my film, Larry Smith, to be on the tour. And they initially gave me permission to be on the tour, but they said, well, you can't bring your camera. And I said, what? I'm a filmmaker. And they said, well, this is how it is. And I said, well, aren't there going to be other press there with their cameras? And they said, oh yeah, well, they're mainstream media, but we don't know who you are. You're just an independent. And they said no. So at that point, I didn't know what to do. So I called up, because I'd been filming in the Vermont legislature, I called up the state representative from Brattleboro and told her about my plight. Well, she immediately got on the phone with the Public Service Board in Montpelier, and they turned around within hours, writing a legal memorandum to Entergy. Why are you discriminating against this independent filmmaker and censoring him? And then it was front page news in all of the Vermont press for 3 days. Vermont Yankee tries to censor independent filmmaker. And so it was really a public relations disaster for them. They ended up backing down, allowing me on the press tour. But what's very interesting is that as part of the whole disaster of public relations that Vermont Yankee did throughout that whole many months of losing the Vermont Senate vote and having the leak and being caught in a lie, they sent a top CEO, the CEO of Entergy sent a top executive to Vermont to basically produce a report behind the scenes. This report was never meant to see the public light of day. He reported directly to the CEO of Entergy, basically admitting that they screwed up bad, in terms of public relationships and why they screwed up. Well, they produced a secret memo. And in the memo, it talked about me as an independent filmmaker, and the whole controversy of how they tried to censor me from filming. And they basically admitted behind closed door that that was a mistake. They shouldn't have tried to censor me because it backfired on them with bad public relations. And this memo finally came out during the trial of Entergy versus the state of Vermont in the federal trial. On the first day, I went to the courtroom. I couldn't film inside the courtroom, but I was there attending. And one of the reporters from the Rutland Herald came up to me and said, "Do you know that you're mentioned in the secret Entergy memo?" And I said, "No." So when I read it, they were actually worried about me as an independent filmmaker. And so to me, that speaks volumes about the power of independent media to rattle the cages of people in power by speaking truth to power. And really, what I try to do as a filmmaker is present the voices of activists from the grassroots who are speaking truth to power.
Well, thank you, Robbie, and thank you for coming tonight. And I think we've kept people a little over than we usually do. So thank you all for coming. And I can't tell you what the next film will be, but we'll be back to our regular schedule of the fourth Wednesday of every month. And you'll be getting an email. And thanks again for being with us.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Caroline. Thank you.
Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you, Robbie.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming. Thank you.
Be well, all of you. Got a day ahead of me now.